Have you ever felt the particular stillness of an Irish twilight, when the hills dissolve into purple silhouettes and the mist that rises from the bogs seems to possess a life of its own? Have you ever heard, in the sighing of the wind through a hawthorn tree, a note of sorrow so ancient it feels less like sound and more like a memory bleeding from the land itself? In these liminal spaces, where the veil between worlds is worn thin by time and grief, stories are not merely told. They are inhaled. They cling to the damp stone of ruins and whisper from the dark, reflective surfaces of the luffs. These are not tales spun for children's entertainment, but collective nightmares that reveal truths too profound or too terrifying for the waking mind to bear. They are ancestral memory, etched into the very soil upon which we walk. I am your guide on this venture into the shadow-shrouded realms of folklore, where we shall exhume the forgotten and give voice to the silenced. For tonight, we are not concerned with the familiar specters that occupy the center stage of popular myth. Instead, we turn our attention to the periphery, to the whispers that were drowned out by a louder, more famous grief. In the mist-veiled hills of Ireland, where twilight lingers like a memory and the air hums with old sorrow, tales speak not only of the Banshee, the wailing herald of death, but of her forgotten sisters. Long before she took on the role of mourning the dying, there were others like her, spirits bound to clans and bloodlines, each with their own song of warning. One was said to appear as a pale woman combing her hair by a moonlit river, her reflection rippling with faces of the soon-to-be dead. Another took the form of a shadow perched upon the eaves of a house, whispering a single name before vanishing into the fog. These sisters were not evil, but necessary, midwives of mortality who guided the soul between worlds. Over time, their names faded, their legends swallowed by the Banshee's louder grief. Our journey tonight will be a work of careful archaeology. We shall unearth 5 of these lost specters, these forgotten heralds of the end. We will explore the chilling premonitions of the Llewellyn, the river comber whose reflection tells no lies. We will listen for the fatal whisper of the scath Gaelic, the shadow that calls a name from the rooftops. We will feel the suffocating embrace of the sea O'Brien, the sentient mist that mourns a tragedy yet to come. We will attend to the deep, resonant hum of the Craig Cohen, the keening stone that marks the passing of greatness. And finally, we will follow the silent, inexorable path of the coennial marb, the corpse candle that lights the way to the grave. These are not monsters to be vanquished. They are forces to be understood, fragments of a worldview in which death was not an ending, but a profound and terrible transition, one that sent ripples through the fabric of the living world long before its arrival. If you, like me, feel drawn to the darkness not for its horrors, but for the wisdom it conceals, then you have found a sanctuary here. I invite you to join our community of scholars and seekers, to become a keeper of these stories that the modern world has tried so hard to forget. Subscribe to our channel and activate the notifications so that you never miss a descent into the archives of the arcane. And as we proceed, I ask you to consider a question. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Which of these ancient forms of warning do you find the most unsettling? A visual prophecy, an auditory whisper, a tactile sensation, a resonant vibration, or a silent, spectral light? Each speaks to a different human fear, a different sensory pathway for dread to enter the soul. And now, with the formalities observed, let our journey into the twilight begin. We begin our exhumation by a riverbank, where the water runs black and cold under a sliver of moon. It is here we meet the first and perhaps most visually terrifying of the forgotten sisters, the Llewellyn, the river comber. She is an apparition of profound stillness and devastating prophecy. Do not mistake her for the being nigh, the washerwoman of Scottish lore who cleans the bloody shrouds of those about to die. The Llewellyn performs a far more intimate and personal act. She does not wash shrouds. She combs her own impossibly long, silver hair, her movements slow and mesmerizing. Her sorrow is not for the clan, but for the individual, a focused, silent grief that precedes the final breath. Her purpose is not to mourn, but to show. She is a living mirror, a psychopomp whose warning is delivered not through a scream, but through a horrifying, undeniable reflection. Her appearance is one of spectral, sorrowful beauty. She is invariably described as tall and slender, wrapped in a gray or white gown that seems woven from the river mist itself. Her face is pale and serene, yet her eyes hold the depth and coldness of the water beside which she sits. Her most prominent feature is her hair, a cascade of silver or white that falls to the ground, which she meticulously combs with a comb carved from bone or yew wood. But her true power, her terrible gift, lies not in her form, but in her reflection. To look upon the Llewellyn herself is merely to see a spirit of the water, but to glance into the river at her feet is to witness a vision of the immediate future. For in the ripples of the water, where her own face should be, the observer sees instead the visages of all those in their household who are marked for death within the turning of a single moon. And sometimes, most terribly, they see their own. Her weakness, if it can be called such, is her passivity. She does not pursue. She does not attack. She simply sits and combs and shows the truth. The choice to look is left to the mortal. The origin of the Llewellyn is tied to water and to sudden, unresolved loss. Legend holds that the first of her kind was a young woman betrothed to a chieftain's son, who drowned herself in the river on her wedding day after learning he had been slain in a border skirmish. Her grief was so profound, her love so tied to her own reflection as a bride, that her spirit became imprinted upon the water. She was cursed, or perhaps blessed, to forever comb her bridal hair, but her reflection was stolen from her, replaced by the faces of others on the brink of a similar, sudden journey into the dark. She is born a moment when the future is violently erased, and so she becomes a harbinger of that erasure for others. She is a manifestation of that specific, chilling moment of realization, the instant one understands that a life or many lives are about to be cut short. In the late 16th century, during the turbulent reign of the Tudors in Ireland, a chieftain by the name of Donald MacKenna ruled his small territory with a fist of iron and a heart of pride. He was a man who believed his will was as strong as the stone of his keep, and that fate was a horse to be broken and ridden. One evening, after a contentious meeting with a neighboring clan, he rode home alone, his mind churning with plans for land, for cattle, and for war. His path took him along the edge of the Guibera River, a place his people avoided after dusk. The moon was a sharp, cold crescent, and the only sound was the rushing of the water over stones. It was then that he saw her, a woman in white, sitting on a flat, black rock at the river's edge, combing hair that shone like spun moonlight. Donald was a man of little fear and less superstition. He reined in his horse, more annoyed than frightened by the presence of a lone woman in such a desolate place. "You are far from home, woman," he had called out, his voice a sharp command. She did not look up, her movements remaining fluid and unbroken. His annoyance turned to anger at being ignored. He dismounted, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel of the riverbank, and strode towards her. As he drew closer, an unnatural chill crept into the air, a cold that had nothing to do with the night and everything to do with her silent, sorrowful presence. He stood over her, a great bear of a man, but she seemed not to notice. It was then, in his frustration, that his eyes fell upon the water at her feet. He expected to see her pale face reflected in the dark current. Instead, he saw the face of his eldest son, Tig, his eyes wide with a terror that was not yet his. Beside Tig was the face of his wife, Maeve, her expression one of resignation. And then, another face bubbled to the surface of the spectral reflection, a face he knew better than any other. It was his own, bearded and grim, a dark stain spreading across the forehead. He recoiled as if struck, stumbling backward, his hand flying to his sword hilt. When he looked back at the rock, she was gone. The only evidence she had ever been there was a single, long silver hair caught on a bramble, shimmering in the moonlight. Donald MacKenna, a man who had never known true fear, fled that riverbank as if the hounds of hell were at his heels. He fortified his keep, doubled the guard, and forbade his wife and son from leaving its walls. For 3 weeks, he lived in a state of siege against an enemy he could not see or fight. On the 27th day, a sickness, a swift and brutal fever, swept through the castle. It took his son first, just as the reflection had shown. His wife followed 2 days later, her passing gentle and quiet. Donal, maddened with grief and rage, refused to succumb. He was the chieftain. He would not be taken by a shadow in the water. On the final night of the moon's cycle, a rival clan, seeing the chaos within the McKenna lands, stormed the keep. They found Donal alone in the great hall, roaring like a wounded animal. He fought with the strength of a madman, but he was outnumbered. He fell, not to a fever, but to a sword cut across his brow, the final, bloody detail of the prophecy fulfilled. The keep stands in ruins to this day, and locals will tell you that the Guibera River still runs a little colder along that particular stretch of its bank. The Llewellyn is a powerful psychological metaphor. She represents the terrifying clarity that can accompany the knowledge of imminent mortality. Her act of combing her hair is a symbol of vanity, of life, of preparing oneself for the world. Yet, this act produces a reflection of death. This is the core paradox. The rituals of the living can inadvertently reveal the truths of the dying. She externalizes our deepest anxieties about fate versus free will. Donal McKenna saw his fate and, in his hubris, believed he could unwrite it. His frantic efforts to prevent the prophecy likely created the conditions, the isolation, the fear, the weakened state of his household that allowed it to come true. The Llewellyn, therefore, is not a malevolent entity. She is a diagnostic tool. She reveals a condition that already exists. The horror lies not in her presence, but in the unblinking truth she reveals, a truth that strips away all illusion of control. She is the embodiment of the cold, hard fact that some things are inevitable, a concept utterly antithetical to the prideful human ego. In the modern context, the Llewellyn has faded from a literal belief into a more subtle folkloric resonance. She echoes in local tales of apparitions by bodies of water, in the unease people feel when staring into dark, reflective pools at night. But her core theme, the confrontation with an unalterable, tragic future, is more relevant than ever. She is a metaphor for the predictive technologies of our own age, the genetic test that reveals a predisposition to a fatal illness, the climate model that predicts catastrophic environmental collapse. We, like Donal, are shown a reflection of a potential future. We are given the knowledge, and we are left with the terrible burden of that knowledge. Do we rage against it, attempting to fortify our keeps against the inevitable? Or do we find a way to make peace with the reflection in the water? The Llewellyn's silence is her most profound statement. She offers no comfort, no advice, no judgment. She simply shows what is. Thus, the legend of the River Comer serves as a chilling preamble to our understanding of death's forgotten messengers. She teaches us that the most terrifying warnings are not the loudest, but the clearest. Her prophecy is not a curse to be broken, but a truth to be faced. She remains by her river, a silent sentinel at the border of life and death, forever combing her silver hair, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to gaze in her mirror of endings. We now move from the open riverbank to the claustrophobic confines of the ancestral home, from the reflection in the water to the whisper in the rafters. Here we encounter the second sister, the Scathglaoch, which translates to the shadow caller. This entity is inextricably bound to architecture, specifically to the ancient houses of established families. It is a spirit of lineage and decay, a spectral archivist whose sole function is to announce an imminent death within the bloodline that built and inhabits the walls. The Scathglaoch is not a wanderer. It is a feature of the house itself, as much a part of the structure as the foundation stones or the great oak beams. Its warning is brutally specific, an intimate and personal sentence of death delivered in a single, whispered word. The form of the scath glaoch is ephemeral and deeply unsettling. It is most often perceived as a distortion of shadow and sound. Witnesses do not see a distinct figure, but rather a deepening of the natural shadows in the highest corners of a room, upon the eaves of the roof, or at the top of a grand staircase. It is a patch of darkness that seems to absorb the light, a living void that coalesces for a single, terrible purpose. From this concentrated gloom, a voice emerges. It is described as a dry, sibilant whisper, like the rustling of dead leaves or the rubbing of bone against stone. It is devoid of emotion, a flat, declarative utterance that speaks a single name, the name of the person in the house who will die before the next new moon. Once the name is spoken, the shadow dissipates, melting back into the ambient darkness, leaving behind only a profound silence and a lingering, sepulchral chill. Its only power is this act of naming. It cannot harm, it cannot interact. It is a pure, unadulterated omen. The genesis of the scath glaoch is rooted in the concept of the family curse and the weight of history. It is said to be born from an act of great betrayal or injustice committed by the founder of a family line within the walls of the home he built. A murder for inheritance, a pact with a dark entity for prosperity, the walling up of a rival. These are the sins that give birth to the shadow caller. The entity becomes a living embodiment of the house's memory of this original sin. It is a spectral consequence, a perpetual echo of a past transgression that is visited upon future generations. It is not a guardian spirit, nor is it a vengeful one. It is a mechanism of cosmic balance, a grim accountant announcing that a debt of blood is about to be paid, ensuring that the original crime is never truly forgotten, its legacy echoing down the centuries with each whispered name. Let us travel back to the year 1888, to the west coast of Ireland, where the once grand O'Malley estate stood against the relentless Atlantic winds. The house, known as Sídhe na Mara, or Head of the Sea, was in a state of advanced decay. Its slate roof was missing teeth, and a permanent dampness clung to the tapestries, which depicted heroic ancestors in battles long since lost. The remaining O'Malleys were a threadbare reflection of their forebears. The patriarch Ronan, a man consumed by bitterness and laudanum, his timid wife, Ilara, and their two pale children, Finn and Isolde. The family fortune was gone, and the house was slowly being reclaimed by the salt and the ivy. It was in this atmosphere of decline that the whispers began. It started with Isolde, the youngest. She claimed to hear her name being spoken from the dark corner of the nursery at night. Her parents dismissed it as childish fantasy, the product of a drafty, groaning house. But then Finn heard it, a dry whisper of his own name from the top of the great staircase as he climbed to bed. He told his mother, his face ashen, but she shushed him, her own fear a palpable thing she refused to acknowledge. The servants, a skeleton crew of locals who had served the family for generations, knew the truth. They had heard the stories from their grandparents. They knew what the whisper of a name from the shadows of Sídhe na Mara signified. One by one, they made their excuses and left, until only the family remained, trapped in their crumbling mausoleum. Ronan O'Malley, a man who had long since abandoned faith in God or man, scoffed at the stories his terrified wife eventually confessed to him. "It is the wind, woman. The wind playing tricks in this damnable ruin," he had roared, his voice echoing in the half-empty halls. He forbade any more talk of whispers. But that night, as he sat alone in his study, a decanter of whiskey his only companion, he felt a sudden drop in temperature. The candle flame on his desk guttered, and the shadows in the corner of the room seemed to coalesce, to deepen into a patch of absolute blackness. He stared, his drunken bravado evaporating into a cold sweat. From the heart of that unnatural darkness, a sound emerged, a rustle like dry parchment, and then a whisper clear and precise that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ronan, it was his own name, spoken with an ancient, final authority. The shadow then dissolved. Silence descended, heavier and more complete than before. Ronan O'Malley, for the first time in his life, was utterly sober and utterly terrified. He barred the door to his study, piling furniture against it. He sat in his chair, a loaded pistol in his trembling hand, waiting for an intruder that would never come. He did not die from an assassin's blade or a phantom's touch. He died 3 weeks later, when his laudanum-addled heart, strained by weeks of sleepless, paranoid terror, finally gave out. He was found in his chair, the pistol still clutched in his hand, his eyes wide open and fixed on the corner of the room where the shadows had once gathered to speak his name. The house, Sídhe, was abandoned after his death and finally collapsed into the sea during a storm a decade later. The Scath Glaoch serves as a powerful symbol for hereditary guilt and the inescapable nature of the past. The house is not merely a setting. It is a character, a vessel holding the memory of a foundational crime. The entity is the voice of that memory. In psychological terms, it represents the return of the repressed, the idea that past traumas and sins, if not confronted and atoned for, will continue to manifest in the lives of descendants. The O'Malleys were not being punished by a monster. They were living out the final chapter of a story begun centuries before their birth. The decay of their house and their fortune mirrored the decay of their spiritual and moral lineage. The whisper is the final, auditory symptom of a long-festering disease. It is the moment the subconscious, ancestral trauma breaks through into the conscious mind, naming the next victim of its inexorable cycle. In our modern, transient world, where ancestral homes are often sold and families are scattered, the literal interpretation of the Scath Glaoch has less purchase. Yet its metaphorical power endures. The haunted house is no longer necessarily a physical structure, but can be a family system, a corporation, or even a nation built upon a sinful foundation. The whisper is the eruption of that history into the present, the public revelation of a hidden scandal, the genetic inheritance of a disease born from a past generation's choices, the societal reckoning with historical injustices. The Scath Glaoch reminds us that we are never truly free from the actions of our ancestors. Their choices are encoded in our institutions, our economies, and even our DNA. The shadow of the past is long, and every so often, when the light grows dim, it still learns to whisper our names. Therefore, the legend of the Shadow Caller is a testament to the weight of history, a chilling exploration of how the sins of the father are not only visited upon the son, but are inscribed into the very architecture of their existence. It warns that a house built on a foundation of injustice will eventually become a tomb, and its walls will learn to echo the names of those it is destined to claim. The whisper from the shadows is the sound of a long overdue bill finally coming due. From the enclosed darkness of a haunted manor, we now venture out into the open landscape, into an elemental haunting that is all the more terrifying for its shapelessness. We come to the third sister, a being less of spirit and more of atmosphere, the sídhe, or the mist of sorrows. This is not a specter that can be seen or a voice that can be heard, but a phenomenon that is felt, a palpable change in the very air one breathes. The sídhe is a sentient, premonitory fog that descends upon a community, a village, or a region in advance of a widespread, collective tragedy. It is not an omen for an individual, but for a people. It is the land itself weeping for a wound that has not yet been inflicted. The physical manifestation of the sídhe is subtle, yet deeply unnerving. It is not a normal coastal fog or a mountain mist. It appears on clear, windless days, rolling in from no discernible source. It is described as unusually thick and heavy, clinging to the ground and muffling all sound, creating a world of gray, silent isolation. Those who have walked within it report a strange, bone-deep chill that no cloak can ward off, and a pervasive, melancholic scent, often compared to that of damp earth, wet stone, and, most disturbingly, wilted flowers, the smell of a graveyard before the graves have been dug. The most defining characteristic of the mist is its psychological effect. To be enveloped by the sídhe is to be overcome with a profound and inexplicable sense of grief, a baseless sorrow that brings tears to the eyes and a weight to the soul. It is a shared, communal depression, a psychic weeping that precedes the real one. The origin of the sídhe Bran is not tied to a single human tragedy, but to the deep, symbiotic relationship between the Irish people and their land. In the animistic worldview from which this legend springs, the land is not a passive backdrop for human events. It is a living entity with its own consciousness and memory. The sídhe Bran is the land's immune response to impending trauma. It is born from the disturbance in the fabric of fate, a ripple of future pain that the sensitive spirit of the earth can feel before mortals can. It is said to be the collective breath of the sídhe, the fairy folk, sighing in sorrow from their hollow hills, or the tears of the ancient earth goddesses mourning the fate of their children. It is not a creature, but a condition, not an actor, but a symptom of a future catastrophe so immense that it makes the very landscape grieve in advance. Our vignette takes us to the mid-1840s, to a small, isolated fishing and farming village on the westernmost tip of County Clare, a place called Balnain, the town of the famine, though it would not earn that name for another year. The summer of 1845 had been warm, and the potato fields were lush and green. There was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. It was in late August that the mist first appeared. It was not the usual sea fog that the villagers knew well. This mist rolled in on a bright, sunny afternoon, swallowing the landscape in a thick, gray blanket. Sound died. The cries of gulls, the laughter of children, the barking of dogs, all were smothered. An old woman named Sorka, who was said to possess the second sight, was the first to name it. "This is not the sea's breath," she had declared, her voice trembling as she stood at her cottage door, peering into the silent, gray world. "This is a shroud. For 3 days, the sídhe Bran clung to the village. The people within its grasp felt a terrible, listless despair. Men sat staring into their peat fires, unable to work. Women wept without knowing why. The priest held a mass, but the prayers felt hollow, swallowed by the oppressive silence. On the 4th day, the mist vanished as quickly as it had come. The sun shone brilliantly, the world was loud again, and the villagers, shaking off the strange melancholy, dismissed it as a bizarre weather phenomenon. They forgot the shroud, but the land did not. A month later, the blight came. A strange smell, a sweet, sickly decay, drifted up from the potato fields. The lush green leaves turned black and shriveled as if scorched by fire. When the men dug up the tubers, they found not firm, life-sustaining food, but a foul-smelling, putrid slime. The crop, their sole source of sustenance, was gone. The sorrow that had been a baseless premonition in the mist now became a terrible, tangible reality. The hunger began. The despair that had been a temporary affliction became a permanent state of being. Over the next 2 years, Balnain was decimated. The old woman, Sorka, was among the first to perish, but her words were remembered. The villagers recalled the silent, weeping fog. They understood that the land had been mourning for them, that the very air had been saturated with the grief of the future. The few who survived and eventually emigrated carried the story with them, a chilling tale of an atmospheric keen, a fog of sorrows that had warned them of a devastation too large to comprehend. The sídhe Bran is a powerful environmental and sociological metaphor. It represents the concept of collective trauma and the idea that great tragedies cast a long shadow before them. In a world deeply connected to the natural cycles, it makes intuitive sense that the earth itself would react to a coming disruption of that cycle. The mist symbolizes a breakdown in the natural order. It is a form of ecological pre-trauma, the land's expression of pain for the blight that will rot its soil and the famine that will starve its people. Psychologically, it speaks to our intuition, to that gut feeling that something is deeply wrong, even when all outward signs appear normal. It is the externalization of a shared, subconscious anxiety, a communal premonition given physical form. The sídhe Bran is a haunting illustration of the interconnectedness of humanity and its environment, suggesting that our fate is so deeply woven into the land that it will weep for us before we have cause to weep for ourselves. The relevance of this legend in the 21st century is stark and chilling. As we face the looming specter of climate change, the CEO Bron no longer feels like a piece of archaic folklore, but like a contemporary allegory. We see the premonitory signs in our own world, the unnatural melting of glaciers, the silent bleaching of coral reefs, the increasing frequency of once-in-a-century storms. These are the modern mists of sorrow, the physical manifestations of a planet in distress, a global CEO Bron warning of a collective catastrophe born of our own actions. The legend challenges us to listen to the grief of our environment, to recognize the sorrowful omens for what they are before the full force of the tragedy they foretell is upon us. It asks a terrifying question. Are we, like the villagers of Baal Nat and Gorda, ignoring the shroud that is descending all around us? The mist of sorrows, therefore, expands our understanding of these forgotten heralds beyond the personal and the familial to the communal and the environmental. It is a legend that speaks not of individual death, but of mass extinction, of a sorrow so vast it can change the weather. It is a reminder that we are not separate from our world, and when it suffers, it sends warnings that we ignore at our absolute peril. Having explored the omens of sight, sound, and atmosphere, we now turn to the earth itself, to the ancient stones that have borne silent witness to millennia of human history. Here we find the fourth sister, a being of geologic time and resonant power, the Coraig the Keening Stone. This is not a spirit in the conventional sense, but a specific sacred megalith, a standing stone, a dolmen, or a prominent rock formation that is believed to be sentient. Its purpose is to mark the passing not of just anyone, but of a person of great importance to the community, a wise chieftain, a benevolent healer, a gifted poet, or a saintly figure. Its warning is not a whisper or a vision, but a deep, mournful vibration, a sound that is felt as much as it is heard. The Coraig appears as nothing more than an ancient, lichen-covered stone, often located in a place of natural power, such as a hilltop, a grove, or near a holy well. Its supernatural nature is entirely dormant until it is activated by the impending death of a worthy soul. When this time comes, the stone begins to emit a low, continuous hum. This sound, the keening, is described as being just at the edge of human hearing, a subsonic resonance that causes the air to tremble and the ground to vibrate. Those sensitive to it report a feeling of deep, ancient sadness emanating from the stone, a sense of a great pillar of the community about to fall. The sound is not loud or dramatic. It is a persistent, foundational thrum of grief, a bass note of sorrow played by the very bones of the earth. It will continue its hum until the person has passed, at which point it falls silent again, sometimes for generations. The origin of the Coraig is lost in the mists of prehistory, predating Celtic Christianity and even the Celts themselves. These stones are believed to have been erected by the earliest inhabitants of Ireland, people who understood the subtle energies of the land. The legend suggests these stones act as anchors or conduits, connecting the physical world to the spiritual realm. They are imbued with the collective memory of the land and the people who have lived upon it. The stone's keening is said to be the release of this stored ancestral energy, a resonant expression of grief from all the generations who have honored the stone and the land it occupies. It keens for a great soul because that person was a steward of the old ways, someone who lived in harmony with the land and its traditions. The stone is not mourning a death so much as it is marking the loss of a vital connection between the community and the spirit of the land itself. Our story is set in the spring of 1798, a time of intellectual ferment and political rebellion in Ireland. A young, rationalist scholar from Dublin, named Alastair Finch, traveled to a remote parish in County Sligo to document what he considered to be fading peasant superstitions. His primary object of scorn was a local legend surrounding a tall, solitary standing stone in a sheep pasture, which the locals called the Coraig. They claimed it would sing before the death of a good person. Alastair, a man of the Enlightenment, found this utterly absurd. He spent his days sketching the stone and his evenings in the local tavern, condescendingly debating with the villagers. "It is merely the wind passing over the fissures in the rock," he would pronounce, "creating an aeolian effect. Your keening is a trick of air and geology. Nothing more." The villagers would simply shake their heads and murmur about the stone's long memory. Living in the village at this time was an elderly woman named Una, the local herbalist and midwife. She was universally beloved, having delivered half the people in the parish and healed the other half with her knowledge of plants and poultices. One morning, Alastair was awoken in his rented room by a strange, low-frequency vibration. It was a sound so deep he felt it in his teeth and in the floorboards. He dismissed it as a distant farm cart or some other mundane activity. But when he went down for breakfast, the tavern was silent and somber. The publican's wife looked at him with worried eyes. "The stone is singing," she whispered. "It is singing for Una. She took to her bed with a fever last night." Alastair scoffed, though he could not deny the persistent, unsettling hum that now seemed to permeate everything. For 2 days, the humming continued, a constant, mournful presence on the edge of hearing. Alastair's scientific certainty began to fray. He could find no logical source for the sound. There was no wind. He placed his hands on the stone itself and felt it vibrating with a life that defied all reason. The villagers gathered at a respectful distance, praying. They knew what it meant. On the 3rd morning, Alastair awoke to silence. The oppressive hum was gone. The air felt thin and empty. He dressed quickly and hurried to the village center. A small crowd was gathered outside Una's cottage, their heads bowed. The priest was just leaving. He looked at Alastair, his expression not of triumph, but of shared sorrow. "Una passed in her sleep an hour ago," he said quietly. "Her fever broke, and she went peacefully." At that moment, Alastair Finch understood that there were forces in the world that could not be measured by his calipers or explained by his rationalist texts. He had come to debunk a superstition and had instead borne witness to its solemn, undeniable truth. He left his book of notes on the tavern table and departed the village the next day, a profoundly changed and humbled man. The stone, its duty done, remained silent in its field, a testament to the grief of the land for one of its own. The Craig Cohen is a metaphor for deep time and ecological memory. In a world of fleeting human lives, the stone represents permanence, endurance, and a long, slow consciousness of the earth. Its keening for a virtuous individual suggests a worldview in which human morality and character have a tangible, physical impact on the environment. A good person, in this context, is one who lives in balance with nature, who upholds community and tradition. Their life reinforces the health of the land-spirit connection. Their death is a genuine loss to the ecosystem, a wound that the earth itself feels and acknowledges. The stone's vibration is the physical manifestation of this wound. It symbolizes a truth that modern society has largely forgotten, that the health of a community and the health of a land are one and the same. Today, the legend of the Keening Stone finds its echo in the scientific concept of the Anthropocene, the age in which human activity is the dominant influence on climate and the environment. We now understand, through data rather than folklore, that our collective actions have a resonant effect on the planet. The keening of the ancient stone for a single good person is a microcosm of the planet's larger distress signal in response to the actions of a destructive humanity. The legend urges us to consider what kind of resonance our own lives are creating. Are we living in such a way that the earth would keen for our passing, or in a way that it keens because of our existence? The Craig Cohen is a reminder that our lives are not lived in a vacuum. They are recorded in the memory of the landscape, and the very stones may one day pass judgment on the legacy we leave behind. Thus, the Keening Stone stands as a solemn monument to the interconnectedness of all things. It is an omen that arises not from the spirit world of ghosts and phantoms, but from the very substance of the world beneath our feet. It teaches that true greatness is not measured by wealth or power, but by the harmony one achieves with their land and their people, a harmony so profound that the ancient earth itself will mourn its ending. For our final exploration, we follow a path lit by an eerie, spectral glow. We leave the solid earth of the Keening Stone to trace the silent, inexorable journey of our fifth and final sister, the coennial marb, the corpse candle. This phenomenon is one of the most widespread and chilling in Celtic folklore, a harbinger that does not speak or show a face or vibrate the ground, but instead performs a silent, prophetic pantomime of the final journey a soul will take. It is the funeral procession in miniature, a spectral dress rehearsal for the journey from the deathbed to the grave. The corpse candle appears as a small, faint light, most often blue or pale white, that floats a few feet above the ground. It is not a frightening, aggressive apparition, but a quiet, purposeful one. Its most terrifying aspect is its deliberate, unwavering movement. The coennial marb emerges from the house where a death is to occur and begins to travel. It follows, with perfect precision, the exact route that the future funeral procession will take. It will move along roads and paths, pass through gates, and even pause where the pallbearers will one day rest the coffin. Its journey ends at the churchyard, where it hovers over the very spot in the earth where the new grave will be dug, before winking out of existence. The size and brightness of the candle are said to signify the age of the person who is to die. A large, bright flame for an adult, a small, dim light for a child. Sometimes, multiple lights are seen together, foretelling a tragedy that will claim several members of a family. The origin of the corpse candle is deeply entwined with Christian and pre-Christian beliefs about the soul. The light is often interpreted as the spirit of the soon-to-be deceased, making a preliminary journey to its final resting place. It is a soul detaching from the body, testing the path it must soon travel in earnest. In this view, the coennial marb is not a malevolent omen, but a natural part of the dying process, a quiet disengagement from the mortal world. Another tradition holds that the lights are carried by the spirits of ancestors or angelic guides, who are lighting the way for the soul that is about to join them. This interpretation frames the phenomenon not as a warning of death, but as a promise of guidance and companionship in the transition. Regardless of the specific interpretation, the core idea is one of passage. The candle is a psychopomp, a ferryman's lantern lighting the way across the final river. In a small, windswept village on the Dingle Peninsula in the early 19th century, there lived a young couple named Aoife and Liam. They were deeply in love and had been betrothed since childhood, their wedding planned for the coming autumn. One moonless summer night, as they were walking home from a ceilidh, they saw it. A single, beautiful blue light emerged from the doorway of Liam's small cottage. It floated gently in the air, bobbing with a strange, living grace. It began to move down the path that led from Liam's home towards the center of the village. Aoife, who knew the old stories, felt a prickle of fear, but Liam, ever the optimist, laughed. "Look," he had said, his voice full of wonder. "It is a fairy light, a good omen for us." They followed the light at a distance, their hands clasped together. The coennial marb floated along the main path through the village, the very path they dreamed of walking on their wedding day. It passed the tavern, the blacksmith's forge, and continued on towards the old stone church at the edge of the village. As it reached the church, Liam's grip on Aoife's hand tightened with excitement. "You see," he whispered, "it is lighting the way to our wedding." The light passed through the lich gate, drifted across the churchyard, and came to a stop over a patch of ground near the ancient yew tree. It hovered there for a moment, burning brightly, before it simply vanished. Aoife and Liam stood in the sudden darkness, their hearts pounding. Liam was ecstatic, convinced they had witnessed a magical blessing on their union. Aoife, however, could not shake a deep, cold sense of dread. The light had not stopped at the church door, but in the graveyard. 2 weeks later, Liam was part of a crew fishing for mackerel off the coast. A sudden, violent squall blew in from the Atlantic, capsizing their curragh. The other men, strong swimmers, managed to cling to the overturned boat until they were rescued, but Liam, who had been tangled in the nets, was dragged down. His body washed ashore the following day. The entire village mourned. The funeral procession began at his small cottage. A grief-stricken Aoife walked behind the simple wooden coffin as it was carried by Liam's friends. They followed the path through the village, past the tavern and the blacksmith's forge. They walked towards the old stone church. As they passed through the lich gate, Aoife felt a cold recognition that stole the breath from her lungs. She was walking the exact path of the spectral light. The pallbearers carried Liam's coffin across the churchyard and laid it beside a newly dug grave, under the shade of the ancient yew tree. It was the very spot where the candle had extinguished itself. Aoife finally understood. The light had not been an omen of their wedding, but a precise and sorrowful map of her lover's final journey. The coennial marb is a stark and powerful symbol of predestination and the inexorable nature of life's final journey. It strips away all the emotion, chaos, and denial that surrounds death and reduces it to a simple, observable path from point A to point B. The story of Aoife and Liam highlights the human tendency to interpret signs through the lens of our own hopes and desires. Liam saw a wedding procession because that was the future he was focused on. The tragedy lies in this misinterpretation, in the cruel gap between human hope and cosmic reality. The corpse candle does not care for human emotion. It is a neutral, factual reporter of a future event. It represents the clinical, unsentimental truth of mortality, that every life, no matter how vibrant, is a path that ultimately leads to a single, specific patch of earth. In the modern world, the corpse candle has all but vanished from belief, relegated to the realm of quaint ghost stories. But its symbolic journey persists. We see it in the narrative of a terminal illness, where the progression of the disease follows a predictable, well-documented path from diagnosis to death. We see it in the slow, inevitable decline of an aging loved one, a journey marked by milestones of loss. The legend speaks to a fundamental human need to chart the unknown, to find a map for the terrifying, final territory. The coennial marb, in its silent, floating passage, provides this map. It is a terrifying comfort, a confirmation that even in the chaos of death, there is a path, a procedure, an order. It is the spectral embodiment of the phrase, as in life, so in death, a final, quiet procession that mirrors all the other journeys we take, only this time leading to a destination from which there is no return. The tale of the corpse candle concludes our survey of these forgotten sisters of the Banshee. It serves as a final, quiet meditation on the end of life's road. It is not a story of terror, but of a deep and abiding sorrow, a reminder that every step we take in life is also a step along a path that has already been traced for us by a single, silent, spectral light. And so, our journey through the twilight of Irish folklore draws to its close. We have stood by the riverbank with the Llewellyn and seen the future reflected in the water. We have hidden in the decaying halls of an ancestral home, listening for the fatal whisper of the Scath Glaoch. We have walked through the weeping, premonitory fog of the Sea Obron and felt the grief of the land itself. We have laid our hands upon the Craig Cohen and felt the deep, resonant sorrow of the ancient earth. And finally, we have followed the silent, inexorable path of the coennial marb, the spectral light that maps the final journey. What wisdom, then, have we gleaned from exhuming these forgotten sisters of the Banshee? What truth is encoded in their collective lore? It seems that these legends, taken together, present a far more complex and nuanced understanding of mortality than the simple, terrifying shriek of a single entity. They teach us that death is not a singular event, but a process, one that announces it's coming through every element of the world. It can be seen in water, heard on the wind, felt in the air, registered in the stone, and traced in the light. These spirits are not monsters. They are messengers, each carrying a different part of the same solemn message. They are the personification of intuition, the externalization of subconscious knowledge, the voice of a world where the living and the dead are not separated by an impassable wall, but by a thin, permeable veil. The unified meaning of these legends is a profound and perhaps unsettling one for the modern mind. They assert that we are not isolated individuals whose lives end in a vacuum. We are part of a vast, interconnected web of existence, of family, of community, of landscape, of history. Our deaths, therefore, are not just a personal cessation, but an event that resonates through that web, sending out ripples that can be perceived by those who are still enough to look and to listen. The forgotten sisters are the sensors for these ripples. They are the instruments that register the coming tremor. Their legends are a powerful, poetic argument against the alienation of the modern experience, a reminder that our lives and deaths are still profoundly meaningful to the ancient, living world around us. By watching this, by listening to these stories, you do more than simply entertain a morbid curiosity. You become a participant in a sacred act of remembrance. You become a keeper of stories that have been deliberately marginalized, a guardian of a wisdom that our rational, sterile world has deemed irrelevant. If this pursuit of deeper, darker knowledge resonates with you, then I urge you to subscribe to our channel, to share these stories so they might find new life, and to leave a comment sharing which of these entities will linger most in your thoughts tonight. Let us ensure these whispers from the past are not silenced forever. The archives of folklore are vast and deep, and many more such entities lie sleeping, waiting to be rediscovered. The legends are not static. They evolve, they adapt, and they find new ways to speak their ancient truths to a modern world. As long as there is mystery, as long as there is the shadow of the unknown, I shall continue to be your faithful guide on these journeys into the heart of the darkness. May your nights be free from the whisper of your own name, and may the mists you encounter be only of water and not of sorrow. The best monsters and the most profound spirits are always the ones that show us something true about ourselves. They are the mirrors in which we see our deepest fears and our most enduring connections to the world. Look for the truth not only in the light, but in the resonant darkness that gives it shape. Listen for wisdom not only in the declared word, but in the silence that surrounds it. And remember that in the ancient places of the world, the stones still remember, the water still reflects, and the shadows still speak to those who have the courage to listen.